All right, perfect. Thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Jeff Oakes with DTool Software. I'll be the one conducting the webinar for today. And today's topic for the webinar is going to be solving the top 3 industry challenges for 2022. So I know a lot of you are interested in talking more about that topic and discussing some ways we can help with those things. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Anyone that is new to GoToWebinar, there is a menu that should show up on your right-hand side. You'll notice there's a lot of options in there. We do have all the microphones muted for everyone just to keep background noise down. But we do ask if you have any questions, please use the questions area of GoToWebinar. You can post those there at any time. And in order to keep things moving along, we'll be saving the questions or answering the questions at the end of the webinar. But feel free to post those as they come up, and we'll make sure we address everyone's questions before we wrap up for today. Everyone should be able to see the screen as well. If anyone's having trouble with that, please let us know. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. So a good place to start, I know we're talking about industry challenges today. I always think it's a good idea to start talking about some of the good news, actually, before we get into some of the bad. Good news is, the construction outlook is actually pretty good, which does correlate a lot with this industry. We posted some stats here, which big thank you to one of our partners, NSCA, who provided a lot of the stats that we'll be using today in the webinar. But you'll notice that this is actually a historical listing here. We go back to 1964, and this actually has projections up through 2025. And you'll see the blue bars here. Those actually notate a recession that we've had in history. And you'll see, this is the famous 2008 to 2010 timeframe. We had a pretty big dip in both the residential and non-residential sector. And then early 2020, we did have a bit of a recession, certainly not as bad as some of the previous ones that we've had. But you'll notice that since then, you've got the residential sector has grown pretty steeply. And we did take a little bit of a dip on the commercial side of things, but that's actually on a trend or upward tick now. So you'll see that the projections are to go pretty high here over the next 3 years, which is good news for all of us integrators out there for both the commercial and the residential spaces. So there's plenty of opportunity that's going to come here over the next few years. Now, some other good news. These are the areas that we're projecting growth here up over the next 3 years to 2025. As I mentioned, we talked about earlier, residential is definitely a big growth opportunity, not only new construction, but also improvements in retrofit. But you also see there's also some rebounding on the commercial space and office space, amusement, recreation. So there are some projected growths here over the next 3 years in those spaces. Now you'll notice there's a few declines on that list, which some of us are probably working in, or parts of our business are in houses of worship and lodging. Obviously, travel has been impacted pretty heavily because of COVID, and things are not projected to bounce back quite to the way they were before the pre-pandemic levels. And of course, some shifts in house of worship too. Moving to on-demand has, lessened the need to make bigger and expand buildings in at least some areas of the country for that case. But overall, most of the sectors that we're all working in are expecting growth over the next 3 years. So that's definitely good for business. And for any of those in the U.S., I just thought this might be interesting to show you. So, some of the stats that we've gathered here, or NSCA has gathered, I should say, you'll see that pretty much every metro area inside of the country is expecting growth, anywhere from 2%. A lot of places 5, 8, 10% growth are projected here over the next 3 years. So hopefully you see your market if you're there in the U.S. Now, I don't have some of these stats for some other areas. I know that just doing some initial research in other places like Canada and parts of Europe, they're seeing a lot of the same trends. May not always be at the same growth rate, but once again, in general, there's definitely an optimistic outlook here over the next 3 years from an economy standpoint. So Wanted to start with a little bit of good news before we talk about some of the challenges that we all face right now in the current industry. And just for before I get into those challenges, just a little bit of background as far as who we are. D-Tools as a company, we are a software provider, and we've been doing this now. It's actually our 24th year in business, and we've worked with over 7,000 integration companies over that period of time. Everything from small one-person operations to integrators with over 1,000 employees. So, pretty large gamut that we've worked with, and we've always worked in the low voltage sector. So our primary markets being, on the AV side, security side of things, fire, structured cabling. So that's all within our wheelhouse. So we don't really do much outside of low voltage. So, I think pretty much everybody in the webinar today is either primarily in low voltage or is a big part of what they do. So it's good to know that we're intimately focused on that part of the business that you work in and have a lot of experience working with companies of all different shapes and sizes. So what are the top three challenges? Well, one of those is supply issues. I think everybody, I don't know of anybody that hasn't experienced that. Price changes as well. We're certainly seeing price changes from a business standpoint in a lot of different areas, especially on equipment. Us on the personal side as consumers, we're certainly feeling that as well as inflation hits. Prices of pretty much everything is up across the board. And then also we'll talk about the shortage of skilled labor too, which, I'll say that's not something that's really new over the last couple of years. It's been going on for a while, but it's certainly gotten a lot worse here over the last year. So we'll talk about all these three topics, these challenges, and we'll talk about just, one, defining what those are, but also two, just diving a little deeper into what are some of the solutions or what are some things that you can do on your end to actually help with some of these issues. So we're going to start with supply issues first. So with supply issues, obviously, there's a lot of things that have played into this, COVID being the obvious one, impacting things. We've had, obviously, business shut down. We've had factories shut down. So there's a lot of, there's a gap in the flow of everything that's really disrupted the supply side of things. The chip shortage is another big one. Obviously, our industry relies heavily on the chip shortage. There's also a lot of other industries too that rely on this, especially things like the automotive industry. I'm sure most of you have driven by a dealership lately and have noticed how depleted the lots look of new vehicles. So, even things like that all have some type of cyclical effect. You've got, you're probably, some of you probably in need of, new vans or vehicles and aren't able to purchase the new ones. So once again, is coming back and impacting us as businesses. Labor shortage. Now we'll talk about labor shortage as far as within, integration companies, but, from a supply standpoint, this contributing factors is, labor shortages hitting manufacturers just like it is us as integrators. So there's not enough people to build products and create the raw materials needed for some of these items. Also, there's a big gap in the transportation side of things. We're especially seeing a lot of that in North America and US and Canada specifically, where, there isn't an issue of supply on some certain items. There's just not enough people to actually distribute and transfer those items to the end user. So the impact of this, obviously, we have products that we can't get. There's no, timeline in place to getting those items. We've got also unexpected, or I should say long lead times, really. So I think everybody's seen a big increase on that side of things. What you used to be able to get in a couple days, now we're looking at weeks, if not months to get, which obviously are impacting project schedules and delivery timelines. And, and for some, it's a frustrating thing for you and your customers trying to get things done in a timely fashion. And then, of course, once you have those long delays, a manufacturer or vendor may say, hey, yep, we're going to get it to you within 6 weeks. And then a lot of us are experiencing, okay, that 6-week time comes and it goes, and we still haven't gotten the product. So it's been really a big challenge trying to forecast projects and get timelines together with all of the unknowns really when it comes to supply. And of course, the result of all this too, the impact of the supply is price, which we'll talk about that too today. But yeah, all of these are, all related here to the supply side. So the question is, okay, so what can we do to mitigate this? So obviously, as integrators, we can't. There's nothing we can do to help, add more chips or make the manufacturers go faster. So there's a few things that you can do, and some of these things are related to tools and software that you use. And so a lot of things I'm going to be talking about today, these are not necessarily just things that you can only get with DTools, or the DTools platform. Certainly a lot of these things we can help with, but just wanted to point out that, it doesn't have to be our system. But whatever the tools you use are, one, helpful thing that you can do to help with supply is accessorize your equipment. So what that means is basically linking up any kind of parts specifically. I mean, of course, you can do labor too, but any additional parts, mounts, cables, brackets, power supplies, things that you typically need with the items, which that saves time in the process side of things. When you're building a quote or estimate, getting reminders and prompts along the way. Hey, don't forget this, don't forget that. But the big deal as it relates to supply is, if you forget to order something that you typically need for this installation, if you forget it, you can't just get it shipped overnight or in 2 days like we used to do. So now we've got to make sure we order it the first time. So having those accessories in there are going to make sure that we charge the customer as we should for all of the parts that are needed, but also make sure we get things in the purchase order queue on time, and so that way there's no scrambling and unnecessary delays on projects just for something basic. Can't tell you how many times I've heard that from integrators here the last few months, just missing a mount or something simple that may cost $40 or $50 ends up delaying an installation for weeks, if not months. So there's some things you can do to avoid that and make sure we get things ordered properly. Another thing is alternates. So having some systems or tool sets that allow you to store backup options, because you may, as we talked about, run into, okay, this item isn't available for the foreseeable future, or the delay of getting it is too long that we can't wait. So having the ability to have your backup options, it may not be your first choice, but what are some other brands and vendors that we can utilize to fulfill that same need? So being able to track those and be able to quickly pivot and switch to those is another way to help with the supply issues that we're dealing with. Streamlining the purchase order process. So with this, I mean, getting POs created and sent out, efficiently, obviously it's helpful for the business from an efficiency standpoint, but big thing too, kind of going back to making sure that we order everything the first time and things don't get missed. If you're manually entering POs, or if there's any double entry or triple entry in that process, there's always going to be room for error. So once again, let's try to avoid those mistakes of not getting stuff ordered initially as we needed to. And the other part of that related, in a way too, is the change order process. So managing internal changes as well as client requested changes is another way that you can help from the supply side of things. So as soon as we know that we need to add something or need to order something for a project, getting that through the process, through the flow of things, so we do get it ordered and we don't have days or week delay or more on getting something ordered for a job. And then also, once again, not missing items. And of course, as always, even before the supply issue, just avoiding unnecessary costs. So with margins, getting smaller and smaller on equipment, it's more important nowadays to not eat the cost on things that you could have avoided with the proper tools in place. So the next thing we'll talk about is price changes. And so for anybody that's taking an economics class or anything, you'll probably may shudder when you see the supply and demand curves here. But just wanted to just take a moment to explain what's going on with the price. I think a lot of us probably already know this and realize this, but it's always good to see it in a visual way. So you'll see here on the chart, this is the typical supply line here, and then we've got the demand line. And the green dot you see here is actually, that's the point of equilibrium. So that's where the two meet, and that's where your price comes from. So price will fluctuate up and down as demand or supply increases or decreases. So there's that relationship there. So what we've had here in the last couple of years with COVID is a shift in supply in a negative way. So the supply has been cut dramatically for a few different reasons that we've just talked about. So whenever we have a shift in supply, that moves that equilibrium point over here. So price naturally goes up. And so you'll see the lines here where we were at before the pandemic and where we're at right now. We've got less quantity and we've got higher prices. So now everybody, realizes that and feels the effects of that, but just wanted to show kind of what's happening from an economic standpoint that is impacting this. Now, and some economists too are also saying that we have a demand shift, so an increase in demand on top of a decrease in supply, which only makes the price go up. So all these price changes we're seeing, it's basically the market's trying to find equilibrium. Unfortunately, this keeps shifting around, the supply amount here, and the demand keeps shifting. So it's a moving target, and likely not something that's going to level out anytime soon, or at least this year. Maybe, hopefully, later in the year, but it's a lot of volatility right now. So what are some things we can do to help manage all of the price changes and avoid issues with that? So if you're not using, industry specific tools, at least one thing you can do is keep a master list of vendors and dates that they were last updated, in a spreadsheet, if that's the easiest way. I know most companies, if they don't have a formal tool in place with a database and pricing, oftentimes they're just keeping price sheets from each vendor in a folder somewhere that everybody can access, which is good. I mean, certainly not ideal, but it gives you a place to grab stuff. But a lot of times I see the integrators, even when they're doing that, they don't have a place to keep where somebody can go and see when the vendor's pricing was last updated. And it's a good idea to have at least one person on the team that's in charge of this, especially with all of the changes going on right now. And that person, should be taking a proactive approach, and saying, okay, we haven't gotten a price update in the last quarter or 2 quarters from this vendor. We should reach out and make sure we get the latest price list. Because what's happening a lot right now is, vendors aren't pushing out those price lists as frequently as the prices are changing. And when you go to order the equipment is when you're getting shocked and hit with these surcharges and increases in prices that we didn't account for. So, best we can do is try to keep those prices up to date. Now, there's some industry-specific tools out there, like the DTools platform, that can help with this. We have the ability to link up with dealer-specific pricing through the vendors. We've got 165 vendors right now that we're currently working with, and we're, adding around 3 to 5 new vendors per month at the current rate. So that's continuing to get bigger and better. But the nice thing about this is you can get connected, and it would be your specific price level with the dealer. Also, automatic price updates, just taking the manual part of it out. We can set up, in our system and probably some other systems as well, the ability to schedule, a daily check, a weekly check, or monthly check, where the system goes out, looks for those updates automatically, pulls those down, so everybody has the latest price sheet or cost sheet when we're building a project. And then, of course, with any tool too, ideally you'd want to have something that can import price list in. Not every vendor, unfortunately, does, price feeds or the electronic data transfers. So if you can get that price list in an Excel format, you want to ideally have a tool that can help with that, where you can just import the latest price list, have it scan and match the parts up. And once again, something we can help with in the DTools platform. But if it's not DTools, definitely make sure whatever you're using has the ability to import those in to match things up. So these are all things that we can do to kind of help mitigate the issues of the constant fluctuations of prices here inside the system. Now, some other tips too: sell more services. So I've been to a lot of industry events over the last 10 years, and I think probably the last 6 or 7, the overall theme has always been some level of, you've got to sell recurring services. So I know a lot of, a lot of our integrators in the security and access control spaces have been doing this for a while. On the AV space, we're a little bit behind on that side of things for selling and managing recurring services. But here's some stats that we got from NSCA through some of the polls that they did. And by the way, a lot of these charts I'm showing you, it came from the Winter Outlook report from NSCA. So if you're not familiar with them, look them up, nsca.org. You can get all kinds of really good research and stats and things which can help you with your business and planning. But this is a pretty interesting one. So this shows you, survey from last year, 2021. You can see, the percentage of integrators, what percentage of their business came from service contracts. So obviously the overwhelming number last year was about 45% of integrators said that less than 5% of their annual revenue comes from service contracts. Now you'll see the shift has changed. This is what the plan is for 2022. So we've got pretty big changes here. So we've got a pretty significant drop in those that expect less than 5% of the revenue, and a big jump across the board really for everywhere. So this is basically telling us that there is the plan or already the adoption of doing service plans or service agreements with your clients. And there's a lot of benefits to this. I mean, obviously labor, you've got a lot bigger margins. You can control that. You're not at the mercy of the manufacturer or other environmental factors, or I should say economical factors that can play with that. It also too, it's predictable recurring revenue. So obviously from an operation standpoint, it is key. And then also, I mean, it does help create a stickier relationship with clients. So when you have, people going out there for routine maintenance visits, you're top of mind. It also gives you an opportunity for identifying, upsell or upgrade opportunities. And, you're the first person they'll call if they have technology needs. So a lot of good reasons to do this. And once again, there's tools out there that can help with that. Our system being one of those. And as far as, the plan and pricing side of things too, once again, NSCA is another good resource for that. They got some good tools and research they've done on how to help companies, either start doing this for the first time or get it dialed in and do a better job. So the last, major challenge that we're seeing here in the industry, obviously, is labor shortage. And I've mentioned before, this is not anything new. Once again, I'd say probably the last, 10 plus years, every year I go to various conferences, this topic comes up more and more and more. So, we've got a big shift. We're bringing in, the younger generations now too, and it's become more and more a challenge to get them attracted to this industry or aware of it. But one thing that's important to know here about this particular chart, this shows the unemployment trends and the employment trends. And this is once again for the U.S. specifically. This is from the U.S. Labor Department, back from 1970 up to 2021. And once again, you'll see, the big spikes here of unemployment. Those are going to be your recession areas here, where we had periods of recession. There was a bit of a spike here during COVID, which you'll see in 2020. But you'll notice that it didn't take very long, as we got into 2021 or 2021 last year, that became, people that wanted a job could get a job. And you'll see that's even true now. There's definitely plenty of the unemployment's at an all-time low. You'll see here it's, I think at this point, is probably in 2022's already surpassed this level. So it's the lowest it's been in really almost 50 years. So it's a real problem that, the good news is it's not a problem that we're just facing here in the integration industry. This is something that we're experiencing really across all industries here. So some things that you can help with this is, one is increased productivity. So if you can't bring on more people as quickly as you need them, then let's talk about ways to increase productivity across the people that we do have. And so just some of the stats that we've seen a lot of our users that are using the DTools platform see at least a 20 to 30% throughput increase or productivity increase. So if you think about it, that's really like for every 5 people you have in your team, that's like adding a sixth person. And that's a sixth person that you didn't have to go out and recruit and all the expenses related to that. You didn't have to train them. You didn't have to, pay for benefits, all the expenses and, that go into that. And then at the end of the day, you can do all those things and then they go to go to your competitor to make an extra, $3 more an hour. So best way to do that is to take the team that you have that knows your process, that knows the business, and make them more productive, squeeze more out of everything that they do. And related to that too, is avoiding burnout. I would say this is probably one of the most overlooked things when it comes to labor because, it's a lot easier to retain the team that you have than it is to go out and acquire and bring on new people. Same is true with customers, as you probably know. It's easier to keep working with existing customers than it is to go out and acquire new customers. So avoiding burnout is one big thing, and there's a few ways you can do that. One is identifying bottlenecks. I think probably a lot of us know where the bottlenecks are in the process because you're probably hearing about it or feeling it day to day. But there's that causes a lot of frustration for the team, especially the person that is the bottleneck, or their role is the bottleneck, and the people, of course, after because they're the ones waiting on things and it's slowing things down. And keep in mind, these bottlenecks. This is for the most part is not an issue with the person or person is doing this. It's just there's not enough resources. We don't have enough people doing it, or there's a lack of proper tools to manage the job. And so proper tools is another thing. Equipping the team with the right tools, not just physical hardware tools, but software tools to get the job done. And so, a lot of times we, see it all the time. Companies are doing a lot of things in Excel and in spreadsheets, which is fine. Like I said, it gets the job done. But a lot of times those are things that you do when you're starting off a company in your early stages. But as the company grows, we see businesses start to grow. You add a lot of teams, you do more advanced projects, and your tools don't grow with you. And so, that's something that, like I said, gets often overlooked. And there's a cost to that. Even though Excel, essentially is free. Everybody's pretty much got it. The time wasted and the mistakes that happen and the frustration it causes are not free. So there is a cost to the tools, even if the actual product itself doesn't cost that much. The other thing is double and triple entry. It's very rare that I talk to a company that doesn't have some, double entry, if not more, that goes on. So obviously that's a frustrating thing that only gets worse when you've got a higher volume of stuff coming through. When you start getting a lot more projects on your plate and you're under a time crunch, having to do double and triple entry, it's really defeating for somebody because it's there's got to be a better way. This is 2022. Why are we doing this 2 or 3 times? So you do create a lot of frustration, friction, and burnout can happen because of having to do that. The other big thing too is just the stress of mistakes. So when, with all these things above, like with bottlenecks, not having the right tool and doing double and triple entry, it puts a pretty big strain on people mentally and emotionally, which, once again, is something that does get overlooked quite a bit. But if you care about the company and your job, you don't want to make mistakes and you do want to do things right. But you can sometimes be set up for failure when you're trying to push a lot of stuff through in a short amount of time with not the right tools in place. And so this is where you start to see people, break down and go off the deep end. They go to a competitor thinking maybe it'll be better situation over there. And these are all things that, we can do that can be avoided just by, like I said, once again, trying to do some of these things to avoid burnout for the team inside of here. So that's pretty much kind of like an introduction to the 3 things, the 3 challenges that we wanted to talk about today. So hopefully that gives you some gives you some thoughts, or at least maybe, if all of this, maybe if there's one thing that came out of this that you're like, you know what, that's something that we could do to make an impact, then great. That was the goal for today. Now, the next part I was going to jump into is actually get into an overview specific about the DTools product itself. So if you're not familiar with the system as far as what we offer from a tools and services standpoint, this will be a good introduction for you, and we'll kind of connect the dots on some of the things that we've talked about here today. But if you're already familiar with the system and have gone through that, then feel free to hop off if you want to. But yeah, definitely suggest sticking around for a few more minutes if you can, and just talking a bit about how we specifically with our tool help with these things. So as far as what the DTools system integrator platform does, there's 5 key things. So one is project estimation and proposals. So getting this put together quickly and efficiently as possible. We'll also talk about drawings. That's another big thing that we do. Engineering is becoming more and more of a necessity for projects, and but once again, that becomes a big bottleneck. Usually, a lot of people don't have enough engineers on the team, and so this once again causes a lot of friction and backups when it comes to the engineering side. And ultimately, when an engineer is rushed, then things will get missed. And so we'll talk about how we can help with that side of things. Project planning and installation. So, of course, selling the project, these days, the fortunate thing, that's the easier part. It seems like there's not a shortage of business really. But there are some issues, and there's a shortage of resources on the execution side. So there are some tools we have in place to help with planning for projects and managing the installation side of things. So we'll talk about that today. Service, I already mentioned earlier, one of the ways you can help with the kind of the price increases and eroding margins is to offer more services. And so we do have the tools in place to help estimate and manage those service contracts inside the system, as well as, of course, manage service visits if needed. And then lastly, the back office side of things. So ordering of equipment, receiving of equipment, integrating with accounting systems, just eliminating any of that double or triple entry that we talked about as a burnout point is another thing that we can help and focus on. So, as we talked about, there's a lot of things that, we usually help integrators with. And I would say, if I had to sum up the 4 most common challenges that I hear from companies, these are the 4 that come up the most frequently. Now, there's certainly a lot more on the list, but like I said, these tend to be the biggest ones that integrators need the most help with. So from an estimation standpoint, to kind of go back to some of the things we talked about earlier, when you utilize our library, we've got this huge database of parts and pricing, so you can go download from our vendors, get price feeds set up to help automate the price management side of things. And once you've done that, you can start drag and dropping and building a quote or estimate inside the system. So one of the things that we do, with the labor side of things, we have the labor industry standard labor times associated to the parts inside the system. So labor being, where a lot of us are making, the real margin on projects, we want to make sure we're estimating and charging the right amount of that up front. So we can build that in, bake those standards into the process. And of course, as you're bringing on new estimators or salespeople, you get the advantage of having this in a database where, it's like having the best engineer or best estimator standing over their shoulder saying, hey, don't forget, this is what you need to charge for this. And it's all baked in. And that's true with accessories too. We talked about that earlier, having the ability to store, parts and even labor to an item. So that keeps you from having to basically recreate the wheel. You don't have to go out and look up the cut sheet or try to find what works with this product every time. It's already in there, so we don't forget to charge for it. And of course, later on, we don't forget to order it. And we can also show upgrade and downgrade options too. So this is another great way to, increase revenue, is to, show clients, areas where they could upgrade their solution, and you can show the price differences. So that's something we can do as well. And of course, the whole service side of things, we talked about that. We can estimate those. And of course, today, in the digital world, everybody's on the go. So everything can be shared online. We can get e-signatures, collect deposits if needed, all through an online portal that we have inside of here. Now, engineering is another big thing. We talked about that being a big bottleneck. So what we've done, we integrate with two industry standard platforms, AutoCAD and Visio. And so you can, within our system, drag and drop from the equipment list or bill of materials you've already built. And from there, we can, do racks, we can do wiring diagrams, we can do floor plans, we can do simple one-line drawings, all that's available within the system. Now, some things that are really nice is we can actually start with the drawing first. So that is something that's a bit unique with our platform is that, if I wanted to start by bringing a floor plan in and just want to start laying equipment and items on the drawing page, I can do that. And that creates my bill of materials. It's adding up my equipment, my labor, my taxes, everything's happening in the background. So I can actually visually, design it and build it and estimate it all at the same time. And that's where you start seeing that efficiency gains. I mean, this part of the process, it's not uncommon to see a 50% time savings just because you can basically do two things at once. And the other big thing with that too is having, all your equipment and reporting integrated in with your drawings. So when you go and make a change, what the nice thing about this, you change it in one place, it changes everywhere. So if I change my, an item on my equipment list, it updates my drawings. If I change an item on a drawing page, updates my reports, updates my labels, my equipment list. So it's all interconnected together. So once again, you avoid that issue of having a mismatch of, my drawings say this, my equipment list say this. So there's no back and forth of, reviewing my drawing, making sure it matches my spreadsheet or list, whatever I've got. We close that gap completely. So once again, cuts down that stress because that is a stressful thing. You're going through and you're counting everything 2 or 3 times to make sure you didn't miss anything. And so this will give you that confidence that we did that the first time. And of course, change orders, we talked about that. I mean, that's where a lot of times margin gets eroded on a job with internal and client requested changes and not, charging the right amount of labor and missing things here and there. And so once again, change orders can be done in here, and you change it one place, it changes everywhere. So it's all part of the process. So project planning installation. So taking what we've built, creating a Gantt chart. Once again, if you're tight on resources, this is where having a good scheduling tool will come in handy. Being able to put things on a calendar, lay things out, have a good estimated time on what it should take to track, and then be able just to dispatch that right out to the field. Another kind of little, this is a small feature of our system, but I think has a pretty big impact, which is wire labels. Our system automatically creates all your wire numbers. We create all the wire labels related to it. And that's just one of those things that, that's a good way to save a couple hours on a project, on every project, because it's once again something that is a bit mindless and repetitive. And there's tools in place these days that can automate that and eliminate somebody having to type those out or write those out every single time. And we do have a field management program too. I mean, for field installation and service. So the techs out in the field have a very easy to use interface where they can track their time, they can document field changes, take photos, put in important information like serial numbers, IP addresses, and MAC addresses, which all come back to service later on when it comes time to doing, a service visit and knowing if something's under warranty and supporting the system. So it's all there. And, in addition to all that, we can track the field changes, get sign off. So really everything a technician needs to do out in the field could be managed through the mobile install side of things. And all that syncs back to the main application. So whoever's managing the project can see how we're doing on the project and get some real job cost reporting too, based on all of that. We also have the service side of things. So we can actually, as we talked about earlier, not only sell and estimate service plans or service contracts in here, but we can also manage them. So there's a place where you can keep track of all of the service plans you have, which ones are coming up for renewal, so we can remind you of those. And you can also track all your service visit and service history under those plans. So that way when the customer ask you, okay, hey, what did you do for me the last 2 years? You can show them, hey, there's all the maintenance visits we did. Here's all the service calls we did, and show them the value of those contracts. And of course, we have the mobile side of things for service. So once again, dispatch out, a service technician. They can track the work, document what they've done, all comes back, and then we can send that information out to various systems and accounting platforms if needed. So, and then really at the end of the day, it's all about return on investment. So, no matter what tool you choose or look at, you want to find something that's going to obviously pay you back, X-fold, what you put into it. So this is, one of the things that we've done time and time again. We've, seen, some pretty big return on investments. A lot of times companies, it takes them, just 2 or 3 months to start seeing a return on that investment. And of course, once it's all set up and everything's implemented, which is true with any software solution, it has the potential to pay you back quite a bit. But just getting through that, that's part of what we do. Since we're experts in this industry, on the software side, all we do is work with integrators. So we've got a lot of experience helping, implement the system and get people trained up. We've done that with thousands of companies, and we keep getting better and better at it. So hopefully this webinar today was helpful. The goal of this was to give you some thoughts, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be, some of these things we've talked about, they are not just software. I mean, some of these are process and procedural things. Hopefully some of this stuff will help. And like I said, if anything, if you get one good idea out of it, made it all worth it. So I appreciate everybody coming by today. I know we got a few minutes left, on our scheduled webinar here. So I'll take a brief pause here and allow anybody to jump in and ask any questions. And if there's no questions, once again, appreciate you taking the time to stop by. This will be recorded, or it has been recorded, I should say. So we will make sure to send out a copy to everybody that attended and wants to share that with their team members.